Honored guests, visitors, former inhabitants, my neighbors and friends. Regardless of whether we count ourselves among the ranks of those who fight, or in the company of those who keep the home fires burning, war changes each and every one of us. Many of us have been brought up to think of war as a necessary evil, something to be undertaken only after somber reflection and as a last resort. Philosophers and theologians such as Augustine and Aquinas defined the concept of the just war and outlined its parameters. Since the birth of our country, we as a nation have engaged in numerous wars, from the American Revolution through the War of 1812, the war with Mexico, perhaps that bloodiest of conflicts, the war between the states, the Spanish-American War, those two massive conflicts of the 20th century, World War I and World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam conflict, the Gulf War, the war in Iraq, and now the war in Afghanistan. We fight for our ideals. We fight to preserve our freedoms. We fight to keep those we love safe from harm. Our sentiments are honorable, and yet war somehow manages to bring out the worst, as well as the best, in all of us. Those who have fought in armed conflict and lived to see their loved ones again agree on one thing. The act of war itself is the closest thing we can imagine to hell on earth. War changes each and every one of us. It changes the soldier in battle. It changes those who survive the conflict. It changes those who endure the endless waiting back home. It is fitting and right and a good thing that we pause to remember those individuals who gave up their lives for us, the living. Scripture tells us that greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. War changes each and every one of us. War changed the likes of Ernest Hemingway, E. E. Cummings, John Dos Passos, Norman Mailer, John Knowles, Joseph Heller, Michael Herr, and Tim O'Brien. Several years ago, a woman at work placed a notebook in my hands, the diary of her brother, in which he had recorded his daily thoughts while on duty in the early days of the conflict in Iraq. It was a sobering read. Like many Americans of that era, he served his country well. When it comes to war, we are all writers, recorders of deep sentiments in our everyday lives. The beginning of the Civil War would mark the end of the American poet Walt Whitman's Bohemian days and set him on a different, more purposeful course. Henry Clapp, Jr., editor of the New York Saturday Press, a publication that Whitman wrote for, opined that in his presidential campaign, Lincoln, quote, has merely used the Negro as a stepping stone to power and is now ready to kick him aside and let him go to the devil. Whitman himself had expressed similar sentiments. But on February 19, 1861, during Lincoln's passage through New York, Whitman watched the president-elect emerge from a carriage and enter the Astor House Hotel as a crowd of 30,000 looked on in silence. If nothing else, Whitman thought, this man Lincoln seemed to possess an unexpected dignity, a quiet sense of resolve. Over the next several months, Whitman's passion for the Union cause would take him in an entirely different direction. Eventually, Whitman would leave his beloved New York for Washington, D.C., where he spent his days ministering to wounded and dying Union soldiers. On November 19, 1863, from the podium erected on the scene of a great battle in which over 40,000 men died, this president said, "It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth." War changes politicians into pensive presidents. War changes bohemian poets into patriots. War changes small-town boys and girls into quiet, somber men and women. In the beginning, here in this gap in the mountains, this gateway to the fertile Farmington Valley, there was the river, and the river ran through the gorge on its way down to the great Connecticut, and the Sound, and the sea. Sometimes in early spring our river overflows its banks, and current comes cascading through the park, past the old railroad bridge abutments, past the old sluice that led to the mill, and down the gorge through the remnants of the old dam. In summer, the river recedes and ambles lazily along, and herons and sandpipers skirt its mudflats. In the fall, gold and crimson leaves drift down to dapple its surface and swirl in the current downstream. I've seen the ice floes jam up and hold firm at Governor's Bridge in winter, knowing full well that no matter how thick the ice, the current will continue to slip by deeply below. Like many of you, my neighbors, I recently had the opportunity to attend a town meeting at Trinity Church to learn the fate of the future post office in our village. I listened as my neighbors voiced their opinions. The discussion was lively, the debate at times heated, yet everyone had an opportunity to speak his or her mind. Today I take off my hat and bow my head and acknowledge those countless warriors who have gone before all of us to ensure that such town meetings as that one will continue to be possible. As I look out over this expanse of hillside, I see a mosaic of stones, rocks of all different shapes and sizes and colors, the same distinctive display of rocks that you might see in the bed of our nearby river. Norman Maclean wrote, "Eventually all things merge into one, and a river runs through it." The river was cut by the world-great flood and runs over the rocks from the basement of time. On some of the rocks are timeless raindrops. Under the rocks are the words, and some of the words are theirs. Sometime this afternoon, after the coffee and ice cream at the fire station, sometime this afternoon, perhaps after lifting your little boy or girl into the hook and ladder truck so they can reach out and ring the brass bell. Sometime later this afternoon, after retiring to your backyard to fire up the grill for the first cookout of the summer season. Perhaps after all of that, you might consider returning here to this hillside as the sun begins to skirt the far horizon, to stand amidst these stones, to take some time to reflect on the words that lie beneath them.